My favorite horror stories, regardless of genre or writing style, all have one major thing in common: building an atmosphere or environment full of tension, anxiety, and a lingering sense that something bad is about to happen. And when it does, the payoff is worth the wait. Today's story, Totality, written by Kauzlarich, is one that is full of all three. And trust me, the payoff is worth the wait. I won't give you much more than that, because I don't want to ruin anything or give it away. But this is a terrific story. So instead, let me introduce you to Chris by way of his bio. Kauzlarich is the author of the horror short story collection Menagerie in the Dark, and the novellas Lazarus and Moody Road. A member of the Horror Writers Association, the International Thriller Writers, the Authors Guild, AWP, and the Chicago Writers Association, he writes dark fiction that unsettles precisely because it lives so close to home. A graduate of Purdue University, Chris lives with his husband and daughter between Chicago, Illinois, and Naples, Florida, or somewhere on the open road in their RV, where the best and worst ideas tend to find him. And I'm thrilled to narrate his short story for you. So sit back, turn down the lights, pull up the covers, turn up the volume, and pay close attention as I narrate Totality, written by Kauzlarich. I'm Will, and you're listening to Midnight Horror Stories. Totality, written by Kauzlarich. Kill me, Drew thought as he sweated in the baking sun shining through the car window. The air was heavy and thick, oppressive in its weight, like the warm wet towel used after a shave at the barber's. St. Clair, Missouri, in August. This wasn't a destination they ordinarily would have chosen, but it was less flashy than the alternatives. Totality was coming. The Great American Eclipse. He rolled down the window, the warm air giving little reprieve. His fingers left an imprint of moisture on the toggle switch. Damn, it's hot. Jimmy exhaled from the driver's seat, his unspoken agreement in their collective discomfort. Stray grass peeked out along the train tracks, which ran parallel to the freeway. The remaining landscape was barren beyond the occasional tree, a glaring juxtaposition to the crowds flooding the nearby town for the rare celestial event. Only an hour had passed since they'd left the hotel, St. Louis distantly behind them, and their excitement-tempered patience had begun to run thin. Air conditioning was a luxury taken for granted. I wish we took my car. Yeah, I get it, Drew. It's hot. Jimmy turned on the radio. You don't have to be a dick. Then stop complaining. I'm just as uncomfortable as you. Drew brushed his hand along Jimmy's, an apology that couldn't linger. The heat forbade it. Sorry I snapped. Drew smiled in response.
Comedian Jerry Lewis died yesterday morning at his home in Las Vegas.
Shh. Oh my God. From Seinfeld? George's dad? Jimmy looked at him, frowning. That's Jerry Stiller. Oh. Well, that's still sad. Yeah, Jimmy trailed off. He couldn't help wondering if they should have stayed back in town. On their way out, they'd pulled off at the grocery store, a small shop with a few snacks and an abundance of eclipse viewing accessories, not to mention beer. He was sure fighting for a spot would be nearly impossible. Large tents and congregations of cars already littered the store's parking lot and nearby park. Tailgating, the favorite pastime on steroids, Eclipse Edition. But here, outside of town, crowds were no longer a problem. Rather, the lack of public space was the issue. They pulled off the freeway onto a pothole-laden road in desperate need of repair. They crested a small hill that opened to a smattering of homes, private land, and the occasional American flag. They were trespassers in a part of the country that was foreign to them, and the unease started to creep between their shoulder blades. "I have to pee." Drew nodded. "Me too. See anywhere to park yet?" "Over there." Jimmy pointed toward the railroad tracks. "I see an empty space on that gravel. We can park there, I bet." Drew shrugged. "Works for me." They weren't the only ones to have that idea. Within minutes of pulling over, several other cars joined them. Jimmy climbed back into the car, having to cut off midstream. "Do we have an empty bottle?" Jimmy asked, voice bereft of amusement. "Only if we dump out some water." "Fine. Would you? What a waste." Handing off the empty bottle, Drew climbed out and looked around as Jimmy maneuvered into the back seat to finish relieving himself. The occupants of the caravan of vehicles waved at Drew as they all got settled. A light breeze caressed the hair on his arms, carrying the hot, oily smell of asphalt with it. It was 12:26 p.m. "About 45 minutes to go. Are you excited?" Jimmy asked, his voice having shed its irritation. He put on his solar viewing glasses, his head focused upward, and got out of the car to stand beside Drew. "You can see it a little bit." He handed Drew his glasses. Their hands lingered with one another for a moment, a subtle squeeze. Then a car door slammed, and Jimmy dropped his hand to his side. Gay marriage may have passed 2 years ago, but the Pulse nightclub shooting followed it a year later. Moves towards justice are often met with reactions of injustice. They knew this place didn't have the anonymity of the city, the liberal bastion of home. "This is so cool. I remember an eclipse from when I was a kid. Kindergarten, I think. I didn't have glasses, so I couldn't look at it." "Well, I'm glad you were smart enough not to blind yourself," Jimmy said, still looking upward. "It isn't any darker. I wonder when it'll start setting in." "At Totality, I presume," Drew replied. Jimmy nodded in agreement. He got his phone out and told Drew to keep looking at it as he took a selfie, immortalizing the moment. "Well, I don't know about you, but I'm thirsty," Jimmy said. He took off his glasses and walked back to the car. He poured a can of hard cider into a plastic cup for each of them before taking the lid off a veggie tray from the grocery store. "Oh, do you want a snack?" he asked Drew teasingly, holding the tray out the open door. "When am I not hungry?" "Open the hummus too," Drew said as he approached. He leaned into the car to retrieve it from Jimmy, sneaking a kiss. "Did you get a kiss?" Jimmy asked, grinning. "Mm-hmm." Jimmy sat in the passenger seat and finally relaxed as they waited. The air was no less warm, but the pressure of finding a place to settle was alleviated. Drew walked around the car, propped open the driver's side door, and sat, eating from the tray as if famished, while Jimmy drank his cider just as steadily. It was 12:33 p.m. "Huh," Drew said, unlocking his phone screen. "What?" "Just an alert. A bunch of animals went berserk at Idaho Falls Zoo." "What does that mean?" Jimmy asked. Drew shrugged. "I'm not sure. It doesn't say anything about injuries, just this story is developing," Drew said, air quoting with his free hand. There are also a lot of bats in numerous locations along the line of Totality, I guess. Don't animals do strange things during an eclipse?" Drew asked. "Do I look like I work here?" Drew frowned at Jimmy, who was staring back at him, expression utterly devoid of emotion. "Smartass," Drew said. "What's that?" Jimmy asked with a smirk. Drew shook his head and continued to scan the article. "That's out west. There's practically no wildlife in Missouri, so I'm sure we'll be fine. Don't worry about it, Jimmy said. Aren't you forgetting about the Ozarks? They have wildlife, Drew replied, frowning. Jimmy shrugged and stuck his head out the passenger door. He looked up at the sun again. I'm starting to see it more. They got out of the car and looked upward through their glasses. They could see a slight sliver of darkness creeping over the sun's western edge. Looks almost like the Apple logo, doesn't it? Jimmy asked. Drew made a huff of acknowledgement, nodding his head. Hiya. Where are you all from? Startled, Drew looked down to eye level to see a woman close by in a bright red shirt waving at them. Her kids were setting up lawn chairs a short distance away, moving as if the slightest delay would result in them missing the entire eclipse. Chicago, Drew said, uneasy at being approached by this stranger. Oh wow, you came far. We drove over from Doolittle. Can you believe this spot? How lucky, huh? It's filling up as much as everywhere else, though. We stopped at least a dozen times before this. Drew nodded his head, his eyes following the length of the railroad tracks. Cars lined them, some even closer to the tracks than the space they had found. People packed themselves into every nook and cranny they could find. The remoteness of the setting seemed to recede as a sensation of something otherworldly crept in. A nomadic people chasing an astrological sign of untold fortune. Yeah, I can't believe how many people there are, Drew replied. Another group of people pulled up next to Jimmy and Drew and started setting up their viewing site. They already had their viewing glasses on as they worked, looking like they were entering a 3D cinema. Suddenly, Drew felt a jolt. Put your phone away and take a look up, Jimmy said. Drew rubbed his arm and shifted his gaze to Jimmy. They locked eyes. What's going on? Jimmy asked. I'm getting a weird vibe, Drew responded. Something is going on, I'll admit, Jimmy agreed. Yeah. Drew picked up his cup, finished the last of his cider, and leaned into the car for a refill. He waved his hand gently above his empty cup to keep the bees from landing in it. The bees were plentiful and persistent in their pursuit of sweet human treats, moving in small clusters between the groups of people around him. Want more? He asked Jimmy as he cracked open another can. Obviously. Drew smirked. It was 12:44 p.m. Drew felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. This is getting weird, Jimmy said, slowly lowering his phone after trying to take a picture of the eclipse with it, his eyes transfixed on the screen. There's a mass riot of prisoners at Natrona County Jail and the Juvenile Detention Center. Drew sniffed. And I'm supposed to know where that is? Why? You aren't. It's in Casper, Wyoming. Strange things are happening along the eclipse's path, which is my point, Jimmy said. I told you something wasn't right earlier, Drew said. Jimmy waved him off dismissively as he continued to read. Drew shuddered and looked around at all the people surrounding them. Sweat ran down his back like cold fingers in the oppressive heat, taking his breath away. How much longer? Totality's in about 30 minutes. We aren't by a city, so I'm sure we'll be fine. I wonder what the hell is going on, though. I'm not sure, but Jay, I'm starting to get a bad feeling about this. Maybe we should leave. Jimmy lowered his phone and stared at Drew. His tone was clipped and riddled with irritation. You're joking, right? We drove all the way from Chicago and paid for that hotel on top of everything else, and you want to cut it short because of a few weird instances happening in confined spaces. It's not like this is happening in the middle of the streets. They say weird things happen during full moons, and you don't hide under the bed during those. Jesus, fine. Well, I'm sorry, but you are overreacting a bit, Jimmy said. Drew took a deep breath, partially to calm his fears, but also to suppress his frustration. He needed Jimmy to understand him. It was their age-old argument. Jimmy took off his viewing glasses, his eyes softening. We'll be okay, he said, his voice reassuring. Drew nodded, countering his natural inclination, and tried to convince himself Jimmy was right. He couldn't shake the chill though, like the Reaper's hand on his neck, something intangible and just out of sight, but nevertheless present. Drew forced a smile. Yeah, of course. I've seen too many movies. Aw, are you crazy? Yes, Jimmy said playfully, rubbing a hand along Drew's face. Piss off, Drew replied, trying to suppress a smile. We need Gaga, and you'll be fine. Jimmy reached inside the car and turned on the radio. Lady Gaga belted out Bang Bang, muffling the hum of nearby conversations from the other spectators. Well, this definitely won't draw attention to us being the gays along the tracks, Drew said. Jimmy smiled. Oh, you think you're funny? Drew smiled back, and Jimmy started a subtle choreography to the song. Not too obvious, but enough to take the edge off and have a little fun. That was the point, after all. For getting away from the city for the weekend. To escape the grind and endless noise. To watch a natural phenomenon in a place of low energy. And to find their zen. Drew looked around, letting the jazzy notes of the song flow through him. People near him were doing the same, with drinks in hand, laughing and conversing, viewing glasses on, and preparing for the show. The blazing sun overhead was constrained, and their surroundings were muted as if looking through a tinted window. Drew could feel the storm coming, whether by instinct or visual acuity, as the world around him darkened under the cloudless sky, that sepia-toned and elusive dread in his periphery. He wiped a bead of sweat from his brow. It was 1:01 p.m. We'll continue right after this quick ad break. Drew, are you watching the eclipse? How is it out there? Drew put his phone back in his pocket. He would feel the response, so there was no reason to hover. Jimmy had turned down the music and was looking skyward again. If I put a pair of these over my camera lens, do you think it could capture it? He asked, already attempting what he'd just asked was possible. Here, use my glasses to try it so you can look up at the same time and see what you're doing. I read somewhere that the light can damage the sensors without protection, so it's probably the only way we should try to get an eclipse photo anyway. Jimmy shrugged, then took Drew's glasses and put them on. Drew unlocked his phone. Chrissy, 1:02 p.m. Yeah, are you? It's so weird how dark it got. We came inside because Tom saw a bat, and Ella was getting bitten by mosquitoes. Like, what the hell, right? There are freaking fireflies outside. You would think it was dusk. Chrissy, 1:02 p.m. Anything like that happening by you? Drew, 1:03 p.m. Nothing here yet. I'm in Missouri, so we still have a few minutes. Drew shivered despite the heat as he put his phone back in his pocket. Chrissy was hours away in Lincoln, Nebraska, yet only minutes away celestially. What was happening out there? Bats, mosquitoes, fireflies. The nocturnal fire and blood sweeping the arc of the solar full moon. What did it mean? The cider tasted bitter as Drew took a long drink, pagan superstition clawing at his sensibilities. Hey, I got one. Jimmy held his phone out for Drew. In the photo, the moon covered more than half of the sun. They had approached their event horizon. Wow, that's great, honey. I can't believe you were able to get it. His voice was hollow to his ears, riddled with insincerity. Jimmy frowned. Are you freaking out again? Drew sighed and slumped his shoulders. Maybe. Jimmy slid the viewing glasses back onto Drew's face and grabbed his chin, lifting it skyward. This might be the only time you see this in your lifetime. Focus on that. The weight of those words sunk in as Drew saw the penumbra in the sky above. the ball of Newton's cradle passing a torch on its inevitable string. But what force was being released? "Jay, it's almost time." "There you are. That's the spirit I was looking for." "Isn't it amazing?" Jimmy asked. "It really is." Drew trailed off as the eclipse neared totality, the moon fitting snugly into place over the sun like a key in its designated lock. A hush descended over the onlookers as everyone turned their attention upward. The breeze settled as if suppressed by a new gravity, forcing genuflection to the eye in the sky. There was silence. It took a moment for them both to realize it, but the birds had stopped chirping. A solitary hoot from an owl interspersed with the distant chorus of crickets were harbingers of the approach of the artificial night. Jimmy grabbed Drew's hand and squeezed it. The contact of his skin felt clammy. Whether it was with excitement or fear, Drew couldn't tell. Perhaps both. "This is surreal." They looked at each other, unable to hide their grins. "I love you," Jimmy said. Drew broke off as his phone vibrated. He looked at it. Message failed to send. He frowned. The message to Chrissy had been trying to send for 9 minutes, but to no avail. Drew clicked try again, and the green status bar moved across the top of the screen. It froze halfway despite the icon indicating the phone had full cellular service. "There it goes," said Jimmy. Drew looked back up as the moon finished sliding into position. It was 1:12 p.m. The light fled, like turning a dimmer switch down, plunging them into twilight rapidly, but not instantaneously. They looked out toward the horizon, shifting their focus to take it in panoramically. They could see light off in the distance, a capped sunset, rays peeking out like the bulb in the refrigerator reaching through the crack right before the door closes. "Should we take off our glasses?" Jimmy asked. Drew shrugged. "Okay." They removed them together and looked up. Their fear of everything that had been building as the eclipse approached was wiped away by their sheer awe of the glowing ring above them, the halo of darkness and majesty. Despite the day's heat, the stillness brought a chill, yet the creeping dread they'd both felt with Totality's approach had melted away. Nobody spoke, taking in the universe's visual statement of supremacy. "Wow," Jimmy said, mouth agape. Drew looked around, and others were doing the same, as if in a daze. There were no birds, just the sound of crickets. The incessant buzzing of bees had been replaced by swarms of mosquitoes, a horde of them following the train tracks like blood through a vein, surrounded by a human buffet ripe for tapping. "It's so calm," Drew said, catching Jimmy's eyes in that exact moment. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen such wonder on Jimmy's face, like that of a child that touches grass or sand for the first time, registering the feeling, the scent, and the sight. He grabbed Jimmy's hand and looked skyward again. Just a minute left. A black blur flew past them, but they were too distracted to register what it was. Its wings carried it in spurts, up and down, rather than the graceful line common of the avian rulers of the daytime sky. And it wasn't alone. More of the small, furry, black creatures appeared, diving toward the trees or brush, flapping their way toward the rhythmic pulse of dozens of heartbeats, summoning them like a dinner bell. In the twilight, the winged creatures swooped in on their prey from behind on quiet wings, pulling them along. It was synaptic, inducing a pack mentality as creatures bit humans, in turn leading the bitten to strike the next closest person, feeding the colony in a domino effect of bloodletting. Their bites were stealthy and swift. It started along the edge, one bite after another rippling through the crowd, teeth and nails accompanying the fangs of the creatures. Then the human victims continued the feast, scratching and digging their fingernails into the flesh of their neighbors, silently pulsing forward in a hedonistic flurry of vampirism. Oblivious to the onslaught, Drew flinched, the feeling of invisible fingers moving more deliberately down his spine. The Reaper, just out of his view, reaching for him. His breath caught. Listening, he heard the light shuffling of people behind him and knew he must be overreacting. He had to be. Jimmy squeezed Drew's hand, the clamminess even more pronounced now. The sanguinarians crawled over the tracks as if metamorphosed from being human into something feral, carrying their winged passengers to the other side on their shoulders. Their actions were nearly soundless, like the assassin's knife, as they latched onto one new victim after another and continued devouring the crowd. The woman in red opened her mouth to scream as her children sunk their teeth into her calf, but she froze as her warning reached her lips, sensation fleeting as if given Procaine. Her dilated, iris-less eyes fixed on Jimmy and Drew. She moved, creeping like a cat on the hunt while the little winged creatures fed from the wound on her leg. Her hand led the way, groping the air before her, fingers curling into a claw, nails straight, a garden rake poised to split the soil. Saliva pooled in her mouth. She could taste them. So close. She raised her hand above her head, veins and tendons protruding, a rheumatoid talon fixed in position. She could smell their cologne, their fear. She could. It was 1:14 p.m. Then a diamond formed in the sky, a flash so bright along the edge of the moon that Drew and Jimmy's eyes began to water before they could look away from the eclipse. "Ouch," Jimmy said, wiping the tears away. Drew put on the viewing glasses and looked back toward the sky, basking in its immeasurable beauty. The sun really did look like a shimmering diamond, pushing away the dark like a lighthouse in the night. He could feel the Reaper's fingers retreating, a shadow in his periphery burrowing further and further into irrelevance with each passing second. Jimmy tried to take another photo through his glasses, knowing it had been a day to remember. Did it work that time? Can't tell, Jimmy said, shrugging. Drew took off his glasses. "We should probably get out of here. The traffic will be hell," Jimmy said. "You don't want to take it in anymore?" "Oh, so now you want to stay. I told you nothing would happen." "Is that a no?" Drew asked, watching Jimmy walk to the driver's side of the car. "Sometime before my next birthday," Jimmy said, motioning for Drew to join him. Drew rolled his eyes. As he turned around to walk back to the car, he noticed that the woman in the red shirt was a few feet behind him. Her leg had a gash on it, and her eyes were unfocused. He flinched, taking a step back. What was she doing so close to him? He felt a knot of fear clench in his belly. He cleared his throat. "Are you okay?" She looked at him, squinting. Her irises were dilated, and she seemed confused. What? I mean, yes. I think I fell." Her movements were loose and wobbly, feet not planting right as she took a step. "I think she's drunk," Jimmy whispered, reaching out the open window, grabbing Drew's arm, and tugging at it. I'm fine. It was nice meeting you," she said, before turning around and wobbling back to her children, who also seemed dazed and stared blankly at the horizon. "Drive safe," Drew said, getting into the car. "Yeah, so let's get the hell out of here," Jimmy said, putting the car into drive. Dirt kicked into the air as they pulled away, creating a thick brown cloud that masked their exit. People milled around aimlessly, staring in their direction, all with squinted eyes. "Did we miss out on the drugs or something?" Drew asked, puzzled. "We're in the country, honey," Jimmy said, deadpan. "Right." Nothing terrible had happened to them after all, but something still wasn't sitting well with Drew. His gut told him, "Oh, screw it," he thought. He reclined a seat, getting more comfortable as the temperature rose with the re-exposed sun. I'm going to take a nap. Good idea. Traffic will be awful, so let's switch in 2 hours. Getting home is going to take a while, Jimmy said. Okay, I love you. Love you too, Jimmy replied. Drew kicked off his shoes and curled his feet to the side. His heel poked into the darkness below the seat, rubbing against something soft. He thought it must be a sock and closed his eyes. Nothing terrible had happened to them after all. What did you think of Totality? Comment on Spotify and let's talk about it. A special thank you to author Chris Kauzlarich for allowing me to narrate his terrific story. Be sure to follow him on social media at chris.kauzlarich on Instagram, on his website at chriskauzlarich.com, and his Substack, Failed Musings. And be sure to follow Midnight Horror Stories wherever you stream pods and on YouTube. And don't forget to leave a 5-star review. I'm Will, and thanks for listening to Midnight Horror Stories. See you next episode.